You don't build a business, you build people, then people build the business. Good morning, one and all. REVA Business School is established with a long term vision to educate and empower the next generation managers, leaders to build a sustainable business which will not only enable them in achieving the operational excellence but also explore new business model. REVA Distinguished Lecture Series has been one of the best practices of REVA Business School, which has welcomed various personalities of great stature who has graced us delivering their expertise in various fields of research, entrepreneurship, finance, and nation building. Continuing this, today we have the presence of Dr. Anand Ranganathan. A business approach is a set of guiding principles that outline how a business should operate. It is an overarching plan that can be used to set the long term goals, develop strategies, and ensure that all the areas of the business are working together to achieve success. A successful business approach should be tailored to a specific needs and should regularly be reviewed and updated to ensure that it remains relevant and effective. This lecture on scientific approach in doing business and politics is in the national interest will provide us adequate insight about the importance of the business approach and how it can be used to create a successful and sustainable organization. It is my immense honor to welcome our Honorable Chancellor, Dr. P. Shamaraju, sir, for today's event. We welcome you, sir. It is our privilege to welcome today's chief guest, Dr. Anand Ranganathan. Welcome, sir. I also wholeheartedly welcome all the dignitaries, staff, and students who have gathered here for distinguished lecture series. Welcome all.
Our today's chief guest, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, is a consulting editor and a columnist for Swarajya. He has written previously for News Laundry, DNA, and the News Minute. Dr. Anand is a columnist, author, and scientist based in New Delhi. He is currently employed as a professor in the Special Center for Molecular Medicine, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has worked with the online news portal News Laundry and is currently a consulting editor and columnist for Swarajya. Dr. Anand is well known for his contribution towards development of vaccine for tuberculosis. Dr. Anand has pursued BSc Chemistry from St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi. He has also pursued BA Natural Sciences from Pembroke College, University of Cambridge, UK. After that, he has also pursued PhD from Pembroke College, University of Cambridge, MA Pembroke College, University of Cambridge. Dr. Anand started out as a postdoctoral fellow, Department of Biochemistry, University of Cambridge, where he worked from 1998 to 1999. After postdoctoral stint at Cambridge, Dr. Anand returned to India to join International Center for Genetical Engineering and Biotechnology, Delhi, as a research scientist, where he ran his lab for 16 years. In 2015, he joined Special Center, where the molecular medicine, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, as an associate professor. His laboratory works in the area of directed evolution and pathogenesis with special emphasis on tuberculosis and malaria. Dr. Anand's contribution for development of a new vaccine against tuberculosis was widely reported by the media. Dr. Anand worked as a consulting editor for News Laundry and made regularly appearances in their weekly podcast. He has also hosted few shows and interviews on their platform. Dr. Anand has won several awards and honors, which include Young Scientist World Economic Forum for the Champion Summit 2012, Young Scientist Medal of the Indian National Science Academy 2007, Young Scientist Medal of the UDCT India 2006, Associate Fellow Indian Academy of Sciences 2003 to 6, Pembroke College Cambridge Scholarship 1995, Cambridge Nehru Centenary Fellowship 1992. Dr. Anand has published several journals and has written 3 fictional books, The Land of Wilted Rose, For Love and Honor, The Rat Eater, and several others, many more to go. It is absolutely an honor to have you today with us, sir. Now, I would request the dignitaries to come on stage to felicitate Dr. Anand Ranganathan.
Thank you very much, and a very good morning to all of you. It's a real pleasure and an honor to not only be invited to give a small talk here, but to also visit your campus. And I was just telling Mr. Chancellor that this is easily one of the top 3 best campuses in India. It's truly remarkable in its the architecture, the aesthetics of the place, the neatness, the cleanliness, the students, how they're all bubbly, and it was truly fantastic. So I really want to thank you, sir, and the organizing team for inviting me for delivering this talk. I would like to keep it brief and like to keep, because there's a lot of young audiences, not that the others are old, to keep a lot of time for question and answer session, because I think that would really set the tone for what we really want to extract out of this session. But I have a few points to make, especially I think given the topic, which is scientific approach in doing business and politics in the national interest. So there are 3 or 4 words that jump out of this, the title anyway. One is scientific approach, the other is doing business, the third is politics, and the fourth is national interests. And please remember that any scientific approach or any moral or ethical approach that you need for business, you definitely don't need any morality and ethics if you want to pursue politics. So that's a completely separate domain, as what we are seeing, what politicians do. But if we want to do good, for the country, for national interests, certainly I really like this topic because it's very novel. No one really talks about how important science is and the qualities that science imbibes in people who pursue science, how important those qualities are, not only for doing business, but also in pursuing politics, especially in national interest. So what are these qualities? I think the first one is reproducibility. That is the most important aspect of science. And that is what distinguishes it from, like you have particle, you have antiparticle. So if you have reproducibility in science, it distinguishes it from religion. But in science, there's no point publishing something that you say has happened. It has to happen again and again and again ad infinitum. Otherwise, it is not science at all. It has to pass that test. Does reproducibility tell you something? It does. And the most important thing it tells you is that if you do an experiment, and the experiment succeeds, it has to be reproducible, as I said. But if it doesn't succeed, if it is a failed experiment, then you cannot be a scientist, you cannot be pursuing science if you keep on repeating the failed experiment. I think that is one of the biggest lessons that science teaches you, that you must junk this pursuit of failed experiment. As soon as possible, you realize that it is a failed experiment, it is not going anywhere. And the whole field of science is littered with failed experiments. Out of 100 experiments that people do, only a handful. You can count the successful experiments on the fingers, and that is what runs the world. But the other 90-odd experiments, they're never repeated. Until they succeed, there's no point in repeating it. But unfortunately, you find in politics and increasingly in businesses that we repeat only failed experiments, because failed experiments win us re-elections, failed experiments, failed ideologies. They are like the magic potion that people love to drink, but they know that they will die in the coming days if they drink it, but still they drink it. And I talk, of course, and I will talk of communism, my favorite subject, because I come from JNU. I'm surrounded by a lot of communists. Not that I mind it, but it is a stark example, because we've seen in state after state, university out of university, in country out of country, the experiment of communism has failed. You look around, Soviet Union, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, China, until it junked it and had this, pursued capitalism. And yet we have communists among us. And yet we have states that keep on electing communists. This is a stark example. In science, if communism were to be the result of an experiment, science would have junked it. In fact, I will come to that when I talk of another aspect, which is social Darwinism, how science is antithetical to communism. But the point is, we have not junked this failed experiment. There are countries that are still wholly imbibed in this ideology of communism. There are states, there are parties. Why is that? We need to think that. Are we being scientific? Certainly not. So that is one aspect, that not only must your experiments be reproducible, but you must junk your failed experiments as soon as possible. If you don't do that, then you're not being a scientist. The third, of course, is, and everyone knows this, I would only be repeating myself, is teamwork. It's absolutely essential if you are to pursue science. And in business, we know how important teamwork is. But there is also a movement that is quite devoid from the new stream of the business-like enterprises that we're seeing, especially in the tech world in the last 20, 30 years. It wasn't the case in the brick and mortar business establishments. That there is a rat race. The speed is of essence. And ironically, in science, Germans, who have been at the forefront of scientific innovation for centuries, they started this new movement called the slow science movement. They've come to believe that science must be conducted slowly, that science, there must not be any rat race. So they say, we are not going to publish unless it is absolutely essential. We will take our time. Our progress and our success will not be judged by the number of publications we have every year, where we publish it, what is the impact factor, what is the H factor, what is the I factor. All those parameters that businesses have established and that are seeping into science, the Germans believe that they're killing science. Because at the heart of it, science has always been a very individual exercise, because it is based on an idea. And ideas very seldomly come from a team. Ideas are made successful using a team. But an idea very seldomly comes from 20 people coming together. I mean, there's hardly 1 or 3, 4 instances in our whole human civilization history where 20 or 100 or 1,000 people have come together, locked themselves in, and come up with a solution. Very rare. Normally it is 1 or 2 people who are constantly thinking, it's constantly in their minds, and then they come up with a solution, and the team, of course, comes in, pitches in, and then it becomes a success. The only great example, a couple of great examples I can think of where team developed something. In fact, one, not two. I was about to say the Manhattan Project, where the building of the atomic bomb, but there also the science behind it was the idea of one individual. Essentially, Einstein, E equals mc squared, that told you that, even a small change in mass, you multiply it with squared of speed of light and you get enormous energy. So that was the birth, that genesis of the atomic bomb. And of course, the Manhattan Project brought in thousands of people together in enriching uranium and then building the technology. And so, of course, that was important. But the idea was of one man. I think the invention of radar comes closest to a team coming up with a solution. The British, they invented the radar and essentially won the war for Britain. And the Germans did not know why their planes are being shot down. And incidentally, radar was kept a secret even long after the war. No one knew who had developed those things. But the point I'm making is that teamwork is important, but in science, teamwork comes later on. The genesis of the idea is wholly an individual enterprise. It's a very lonely thing. It's almost very similar to being a writer. You're very lonely. You are against the world. And to give you one example, one of the greatest inventions, at least in biology in the last 40 years, 50 years, is the, I call it the invention, not discovery, because there's a difference between invention and discovery. What you discover was already there. You've just discovered it, unearthed it. But what you've invented is solely yours. It's your enterprise. So the invention of the polymerase chain reaction by Kary Mullis, he got the Nobel Prize for it. And the Germans, the slow science movement, they never tire of using this example of Kary Mullis. Right now, millions of PCRs are being conducted. We've seen COVID, how RT-PCR became almost like a household word. So this polymerase chain reaction was the invention of Kary Mullis. He got the Nobel Prize for it. In his whole life, he has just a couple of papers. Right now, you have many Indian, some of my colleagues, they have 200 papers. Some of them, I think Professor C.N.R. Rao has, 2,000 papers. Kary Mullis had 2. One fetched him the Nobel Prize. And he got this idea of PCR while he was stuck in a traffic jam in California going to meet his girlfriend. And he thought of PCR. So for getting a great idea, you need 2 criteria. You need to be stuck in a traffic jam and you need to have a girlfriend. But other than that, the fact of the matter is, you take another example. You take Fred Sanger, 2-time Nobel laureate. First time in the 50s, he got the Nobel Prize for determining how to sequence, developing a method to sequence proteins. And in the 80s, late 70s, to develop a method to sequence DNA, which was absolutely remarkable. In his whole life, he has about 15 papers. He almost worked alone. He had one student. When he got the DNA sequencing thing done, he had already retired. He retired in the late 60s, and he had a small lab in Cambridge, and he had one student. And that paper, I think it has one more student's name in it, PNA's paper, and he got the Nobel Prize for it. One of the most spectacular, it's almost art, the Sanger method for sequencing DNA. Before that, you could not sequence the DNA. You couldn't find out what is the sequence of the basis of your genome of any DNA piece. And he didn't patent it. He could have been a trillionaire by now. He didn't patent his invention. Same with Salk, who developed the vaccine for polio. Same with Tim Lee, who developed the World Wide Web. People asked him, why haven't you patented your invention? He said, can you patent the sun? These are the great lessons one must learn from science and scientists. That it is an individual exercise. That one must proceed very slowly, very cautiously. One must be able to reproduce one's findings. One must be able to junk a failed experiment. The fourth thing, which is very important, and which politicians certainly do not follow, I hope businesses follow it, is that there is only one truth. There are no versions of truth. In science, there is only one finding. If you hear a scientist say that there are 3 different versions of this truth, then that's not science at all. It may be that what you perceive something which is true now, 30 years later, might not be true. That's a different matter. New investigative tools come into being. New findings throw more light on it. New investigations. They junk previously held dogmas. But the axioms of science, there's only one true. For example, there are no 2 forms of B form of DNA. It's double helical. You can't say that there might be a triple helical DNA B form as well. You can't do that. So that pursuit of truth is pursuit of one truth. And once you attain it, you must stick to that. There is no gray. There is black and white. And that is what science tells you. And politics is just the opposite, because you need to placate. You need to bring in the gray. And with gray, it comes hypocrisy, almost like a bedfellow of gray. Because while you're criticizing someone, you're bringing out the evilness of that person. Gray tells you that that person also did some good. And that is the reason why there are still people who worship Mao Zedong. There are still currency notes in China that have Mao on them as a watermark, because they say Mao did some good. They forget that Mao killed 63 million of his own people through the Great Leap Forward. They forget all the atrocities that Pol Pot committed, or Mao, or Stalin, or Hitler. They only remember some of the good things that they did. It's almost like Mercury being so close to the sun, it stopped revolving. You only see one side of it. And you being hypocrite if you do that. You're not being black and white. You are being economical with the truth. And that is the destruction of all morality and ethics in our society. When you start also believing that, let me ignore all the evil things this person has done, let me only remember this person by the some good that that person has done. Science tells you, you shouldn't do that. You can't do that. That is not objectivity. But politics tells you that is exactly what you should do, because you need to placate everyone. The other aspect, before I come to what is good and what isn't good in national interests, the final aspect of, so we've talked of morality and ethics, that are the bedrocks, fundamentals of science. We've talked of reproducibility. We've talked of junking failed experiments. We talked of teamwork. We've talked of there being only one truth and shunning this idea of the gray. Let me now come to one of the most important and unfortunately most misunderstood aspects of science, especially when it deals with society, which is the Darwin's theory of evolution and the so-called survival of the fittest. This is one of the reasons why, unfortunately, a lot of people from the non-science background, they speak very derisively of scientists as well, because they somehow have come to believe that science is only, or biology is only survival of the fittest. And therefore, those who are not fit, science tells you that they must be junked, they must be ignored. Nothing could be further away from the truth. First of all, Darwin's theory of evolution is not a theory anymore. It is an axiom. It used to be theory 100 years ago, more than that when it was propounded. But the fact is, the following 100 years, there have been landmark experiments that have proved that it is not a theory anymore. It is a fact. It is an axiom of science. It is as irrefutable as 2 plus 2 equals 4. Tomorrow, you cannot have 2 plus 2 equaling 5. Just like that, tomorrow, you cannot conduct an experiment that will negate the theory of evolution. And there are few things that the theory of evolution does, of course, and its simplicity is, it is mind-blowing. But it tells you that survival of the fittest essentially means you're able to adapt to the changing environment. And if you are able to adapt to it, you will survive. And you are able to adapt to it as a living being only because your DNA mutates, sensing the environment, sensing the stress. And some of those mutations are helpful mutations. And if those mutations are not helpful mutations, you simply die and are forgotten. But some amongst your species are able to accumulate those helpful mutations over millions of years. And that is what has allowed you to survive. And human evolution is still going on. Sometimes it is as old as 10,000 years. For example, lactose intolerance. It's a very recent phenomena. There are other things. Caesarean births are actually changing the way human pelvis is shaped. It's quite scary, but the fact is that humans are constantly evolving because we are constantly mutating. And one of the fundamentals of surviving, adapting, is that you must believe in diversity. You must mix. You must mate, but you must mix. So science encourages diversity. It encourages mixing of your genes, because if you don't mix your genes, as science tells you, you end up in endogamy, like Parsis, like many tribal populations. And then you end up with horrible genetic diseases as well, because you're not mixing. You're not allowing your mutations, helpful mutations, to accumulate. But to come back to why it is an axiom anymore, you had William Stemmer's experiment called sexual PCR, where you could replicate what happened in millions of years of evolution in 1 hour using Kary-Mullis's PCR technique to accumulate those mutations. And what he was able to do was to actually use a gene that would give resistance to a bacteria against an antibiotic. And when he increased the antibiotics to 1,000,000 times the concentration, of course the bacteria died. But with those helpful mutations that he was able to insert into those genes, one bacteria survived even 1,000,000 times the concentration of penicillin. So that was this whole branch that you opened up is called directed evolution, that you're directing the way evolution should happen. And of course, the discovery of the protocell, that even before Darwinian evolution, you have Jack Szostak and his protocell saying that even though genes were not being replicated inside the primitive cell, it was still able to replicate. It was still able to adapt and continue with accumulating helpful mutations. And of course, genome sequencing. Nothing gives you a more starker view of why this is not a theory anymore, but a fact, is when human genome was sequenced and chimpanzee genome was sequenced and bacteria genomes were sequenced, and we found out that we share so many of our genes, of these so-called housekeeping genes that are there in bacteria and E. coli that are there in humans. How 98.4% of a chimpanzee genome is not just similar but identical to a human genome. Identical. How 2 million or millions and millions of bases, and there is not a single difference between the chimpanzee genome and the human genome. So all these things came together to give you this vision that it is not a theory anymore. We just call it because it's the phrase that is used. But more importantly, this misreading is what we call social Darwinism. That is that throughout our history, people were able to proclaim their supremacy, their exclusivist attitude, to say that it is my right to subjugate a population because I am fitter than that population. I have means to kill that population. And whole continents were annihilated with this thought. This is the genesis of imperialism itself, that people took pride, people like Winston Churchill took pride in decimating the entire population of Tasmania. The last surviving Tasmanian was killed. And like what taxidermists do, they filled him up with wool and they preserved him in a museum. And Churchill was proud of that because he said Tasmanian could not compete with the gun that I had. He only had a spear. So it was my right to annihilate these populations. That is what Spaniards did, Portuguese did in Latin America and Mexico. This was the misreading, this so-called survival of the fittest. And what what Darwin also was at pains to tell, but was wholly ignored by these charlatans because they used Darwin's theory for their end. Survival of the fittest became a phrase by which you could subjugate entire populations by saying that I am fitter than you. You don't have a right to survive, but I do. But Darwin said one of the most important endowments that prove the theory of evolution, as much as survival of the fittest, is empathy. That humans will not be able to survive without this so-called milk of kindness. Humans have to be kind to each other. Fraternity is as important as survival of the fittest. It is empathy that allows people to survive. It is your cognitive ability, and that is what science also has shown, that in the last 2 million years, human brain has increased its size by 3 times. No other species can boast of this. And what it tells you is that it is only through social interactions, through us having empathy towards each other, to caring for each other. That is a biological trait. That is what also is theory of evolution. One must never forget it. And here I saw in the lounge there was this wonderful quotes by some really iconic legends of businesses. And one of them was Steve Jobs. And of course, everyone knows Steve Jobs. But as Sir was saying, I'll hold him to account. He said one of the things that I like in you, Anand, is that you are absolutely ruthlessly objective. So please allow me, even though it is painful for me as well to criticize Steve Jobs. It's very painful. But the fact is he was a social Darwinian. He was absolutely ruthless in his pursuit. He was the most unempathetic, unsympathetic person you could find. But what he did, people find absolutely remarkable. It is contentious whether others could have done what Steve Jobs did. There are whole books written on that fact. Some people say, of course, it could be done with a lot more empathy. But Steve Jobs truly believed in survival of the fittest. But there are a lot of businesses that have simply perished because they didn't believe in empathy. And this, I move very swiftly from politics to business because I think this is very important. This distinction that we as a society must make, not only must make, but must confront any politician who blurs this boundary between capitalism and crony capitalism. This phrase crony capitalism has been deliberately encouraged not only by our opposition, Rahul Gandhi, who says everyone is a crony capitalist, Adani, Ambani. It doesn't matter that in 2 Congress-ruled states, Adani is absolutely ruling the roost and Rahul Gandhi is absolutely silent about it. He has given licenses to Adani to mine the forests for coal in Chhattisgarh, Congress-ruled state. And he's given license to Adani to take all that coal to Rajasthan, a Congress-ruled state, to generate electricity. But of course, Adani is a villain. Ambani, the villain, the crony capitalist. Crony capitalism is not crony capitalism. The fault is of cronies. The fault is not of capitalism. This world can only survive because of capitalism. But capitalism of the moral and ethical kind. Not the capitalism which is crony, which is only for a few people. And certainly not the capitalism that made the West so prosperous as it is now. The West is reaping the benefits of horrendous slave trade, which killed 66 million black people from Africa over 500 years, taken to America, taken to Latin America, to work in plantations. That is not the kind of capitalism that this world wants and this world can survive for long on. That part of capitalism must never be repeated again. Subjugating a whole class of people, slave trade, not being conscientious, not being morally right, ethically upright, not being empathetic to your workers. Capitalism has to be of the variety that Darwin envisioned theory of evolution is. Otherwise, everything collapses. So when we talk of capitalism, how to take it forward, you can see it in the companies that are doing it. You have this social responsibility, you have a small set of funds that companies now set aside for contributing to society, you have philanthropists. But more than that, now people not just demand, they get it even without demanding. Some measures that are for the benefit of the society, more than that, benefit of the workers who come to a company. You have creches. 30, 40 years ago, a woman, a mother, could not work in a company because where would she keep her child? There were no creches as it is to talk of, but now in companies you have creches. You have a lot of amenities that companies give to their workers so that they are encouraged to come and spend more time. That's the kind of capitalism that will encourage wealth generation. And that is what businesses should think of. To make a company that, of course, has to be listed so that the shares of its profits not only are distributed, but also the wealth that it generates is because of people think that this company is worth putting my money in. It has to be that level of scrutiny, not by 5 or 6 people deciding that this company or this product is good, but by people deciding. And when people decide, people are ruthless, ruthless. 20 years ago, no one would have thought that Nokia would be history. No one. Where is Nokia now? I remember using that Nokia phone and I thought, well, this will last for 50, 60 years. Technology is ruthless. But more than technology being ruthless, it is the people who use the technology who decide. People decided. The time has come for smartphones. I cannot use Nokia anymore. Of course, Steve Jobs again was absolutely instrumental in that. But progress has to be done keeping Darwin's ideas in mind and correctly interpreting them, not wrongly interpreting them. So please get it out of your minds, businessmen among you and those who want to pursue politics, that Darwin only meant survival of the fittest. Absolutely not. Half of theory of evolution is empathy. That is one of the biggest evolutionary endowment that Darwin could provide. Finally, I come to national interests. Here I bifurcate. Because what is in national interest? That itself one could go on. Why should Indians work for national interest? That itself I could speak an hour on. But I only have the next 5 minutes. I think I don't want to spend more time on this. But what I want to say is that, of course, we are Indians. I am a proud Indian. All of you are proud Indians amongst you. Are absolutely proud of being Indians. But what does science also tell you? That there is something that is above being Indian. There is something that our civilizational endowment tells you, that there is something above being Indian. There is something belonging to the whole world. You know that phrase? It is being used as a tagline for G20 summit as well. Can any one of you tell me what that phrase is? India is going to host G20. And the motto of G20? Anyone? Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is my family. And if one were to scrunch down 6,000, 7,000 years of our civilizational wisdom and were to be so ruthless and harsh as to just bring out one bit of information that you would like to give to the world, personally it would be just this phrase, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is my family. Thousands of years of wisdom and philosophy and science are encapsulated in this. That more than me thinking of what is good for India, I must think of what is good for the world. How many nations do it? The West certainly has never done it. Even now it doesn't do it. West wanted to destroy the world thinking of it as a completely different entity from the West. So the West destroyed all the nations it colonized, annihilated it, destroyed their economy, their people. Britain owes us 45 trillion pounds. But Britain is rich. Britain thought it would remain rich forever by doing that. But we said Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Even now when Trump was there, he reneged on the Paris climate change deal, which would have saved this world from an impending disaster. Being a first world country. And what did we do? We need all the energy we can get. We are a developing country. Our GDP per capita is barely $2,500. America's is $60,000, $70,000. They went back on their word. But we stood firm. We said, no, Paris climate deal is good for the world. We would suffer because our expenses would rise to generate energy. We would have to go for generating cleaner energies. Modi's already set targets which are unreal, incredible. 600 gigawatts of power, I don't know how many, even the mind boggles even thinking about them. Nuclear energy, wind energy, solar energy, renewables. The alternative was coal. The alternative was much cheaper, 10 times cheaper. But we said no. China became prosperous in 20 years using coal as power. Every country that has jumped to a middle income or a high income economy has used the conventional fuels to catapult itself to. But we said no, it is not good. We must change our methods, even at our cost. And we are going to do it, and I'm proud. That is what makes me proud. That we are not only working in national interest, we are working for the interest of the world. One must never forget it. But the irony is, the sadness is that while we remember that we must work for the development of the world, our politicians have forgotten to develop our own country for their nefarious ends and means. And I give you just two examples of this. There are hundreds of examples, but just two. One is the continuance of public sector units. I wrote a piece where I got a lot of trolling from the supporters of this government, but I said, look, it was Prime Minister Modi who promised in 2013 that government has no business to be in business. One of the most landmark and amazing phrases any politician has ever uttered, and I was proud when he said that. But in the last 8 years, all that his government has done is to be in the business of running businesses. Why? Because he very quickly realized that he would be losing a lot of votes, he would be losing a lot of constituencies if he were to do privatization. In the last 8 years, there's been only one privatization, Air India. And that too has languished for God knows decades. 70,000 it's in debt. There are hundreds of public sector units that are wallowing in debt. And yet, BSNL, so many, the government keeps on paying. I and my co-author, Karan Bhasin, we went through extraordinary trouble to collate all those public sector units, both central and state. The number is 1,860 odd. Out of that, 400 are non-functional. And yet the government is paying 21% of its annual budgetary allocation to propping up those public sector units. We're going to have a budget in less than a month's time. And Ms. Sitaraman has only 31 odd lakh crores to allocate. 21% of that goes in public sector units. 400 of them are non-functional. We had till a year ago a public sector unit that was being given thousands of crores since 1985. And its job was to make chlorofluorocarbons in the 80s that the WHO and the world banned. So it wasn't making these thank God, it wasn't making these chlorofluorocarbons for 30 years, and yet the government was paying it thousands of crores. Think of it. And I don't believe in this disinvestment bunkum. Because what the government very cleverly does, it disinvests from one public sector unit and forces its other public sector unit to buy that. So it is switching the junk silver, family junk from one pocket to the other. So LIC is left holding the can. You disinvest in Coal India and LIC is forced to buy it. You give capital infusion of 6 lakh crores to public sector banks. Why? Why do you need public sector banks? They are rife with corruption, with loans that are ordered by politicians. That's your money. It's Indian taxpayers' money. Is it not in national interest that government gets out of business? Is this not corruption? You would hold a fellow guilty who gives you 200 rupees to a traffic guy to get out of a traffic violation. You call that corruption. And you have this government and previous governments before it wasting lakhs and lakhs of your money. And you not only not call it corruption, you keep on electing them. That perspective has to change. Why should my money, hard-earned money, go into paying for decades 400 companies that are not producing even an egg? Is that in national interest? Number 2, and this is very painful, because this comes closest to junking whatever we've learned from science. And I talk here of the farm reforms. One of the, I would say, it would have been the greatest step independent India would have taken, did take, in ushering in these 3 farm bills. It would have catapulted us from very low income economy, $2,500 per capita, to $15,000 per capita, or what China is now, within 10 to 15 years. And I say that with confidence because I have data with me. Because the most archaic sector that we had, the most primitive, medieval, was actually the agricultural sector. And that has been the tragedy of this nation. Because we have not only disowned our people, we have junked science for the benefit of a few votes and getting elected and re-elected. Agriculture is a sector that contributes only 12.5 or 13% to our GDP, which is pitiful. And yet, 44% of our active labor force of 515 million Indians is involved in this. 44% of our labor force in developed countries, it is 2%. In middle income economies or high income, it's maximum 3% of active labor force. Here you have 44% of 515 million Indians involved in something that is contributing only 12% to our GDP. How on earth is that sustainable? How on earth can we become prosperous with this data? 83% of Indian households are dependent on Indian agriculture. 95% of Indian farmers are not insured. I can go on and on and on. 117,000 farmers have committed suicide in the last 15 years. Nothing has changed. India is the world's 2nd largest producer of sugarcane. 2nd largest. Our politicians pride in this. Pride, nothing could be more shameful. We produce 350 billion kilograms of sugarcane. You know how much water that requires? I will tell you because I calculated it. 1 quadrillion liters. You know how much that is? Quadrillion to samajh mein bhi nahi aaya. Trillion se aage koi jata nahi. Gazillion, this whatever. 1 quadrillion liters is equivalent to the water present in 10 Ganga Sagar dams. That is the water India spends in producing 350 billion kilograms of sugarcane. Sugarcane requires only 9% of arable land, but 77% of the irrigable water. This is a calamity which is happening decade upon decade upon decade. And you know what has happened to the sugar prices? They have halved in the last 5 years. And you know what the politicians have done? They have increased by 3 times the remuneration they pay to farmers who produce sugarcane. Maharashtra, under Mr. Fadnavis, when he was the chief minister, brought in a regulation that I really praise, that said you have to have government permit if you want to grow sugarcane. We can no longer afford to waste water. It's killing us. Our water capacity availability per capita has reduced by 25% in the last 10 years. You know that lagan thing, khane ko nahi hoga, peene ko nahi hoga, that's a reality in independent India. Fadnavis said, you need government permission to grow sugarcane. Within a month, he had to tear down that order. Because one politician who runs the sugar lobby thing, I won't name that politician in Maharashtra, said, we will not allow you to have this order. Is this in national interest? Is it in national interest when the 3 farm bills that said we will have an alternative to APMC so that farmers could come and sell their produce, like businesses do? You have a product. Do you go to a government site to sell your product? No. Don't you have a right to sell your product to whomsoever you want, wherever you want? Don't you have a right to set up a shop wherever you want? Why were our farmers not being allowed this? Why were the business enterprises that took the farm produce under the Essential Commodities Act so that the government could dictate as and when stocking was illegal, they would arrest go-down owners? Why? Is it not the prerogative of a businessman to stock and to be able to sell whenever he wants to sell? So why on earth would businesses invest in making world-class go-down so that you could sell your agricultural produce all year round, so that you could store it all year round? Why could farmlands not be leased to businesses and corporates who could then grow cash crops that would give you 12 times, 50 times, 100 times the amount you earn through wheat and rice that should not be grown in Punjab? It's not the climate or the soil that is meant to grow rice. And yet we are growing it. Our buffer stock capacity should be 30 million tons of rice. Right now, we have 105 million tons of rice. 60 million tons is rotting. We don't need it. It's being consumed by rats in FCI godowns. These farm bills would have changed that. And you know what really hurts is that these 3 laws, almost verbatim, were there in the manifesto of all opposition parties, including the Congress. You go through Congress's manifesto of 2019 election, page number 19, I know it verbatim because I've been shouting from rooftops about this. Almost verbatim. Congress states were already following the 3rd farm law. Leasing land to corporates. Punjab had already done it. And yet, we went back. Is this in national interest? Is this not corruption? These are the questions that we need to ask. We need to ask, how can we sustain? We have, I think, overtaken China now as the world's most populous country, or maybe are going to overtake in the next month. We have 1/3 the land China has. We are still growing wheat, rice, sugarcane. We won't have water. There are still some people among us who are selling the snake oil of organic farming to feed this country. We still have regulators, including those in this government, that won't pass regulations to make GMO as a choice that Bangladesh has, that many African countries have, because they can see the future. They can see 30 years ahead. We won't have enough food to feed us. Science is helping us. Science is there. But you have to lift the boom barrier. And in one case, not just science, even Supreme Court is there. 60% of our river water, glacial fed or otherwise, goes into the oceans. We don't have water. Forget about food, we don't have water. Supreme Court said, get on with the river linking. What are you doing? One part of India has floods, the other part is completely barren, famine. Why can't you do this? Enough committees have sat for 30 years. I have read the reports because I wrote an article on river linking. And yet, you know what happened 2 years ago in Latur? The place was so dry that for a month, Indian Railways ran water trains. I don't know whether you saw those visuals. And politicians were proud of it. They were cutting ribbons for water trains. I would hold them in criminal contempt. You are proud of water trains, you should be linking rivers. This is what the new generation has to think. You have to think above ideology. You have to think above your religion. You have to think above your party. You have to think above India. You have to think of the world. Because there is one thing that science bestows on all of us, above everything, which nobody even thinks it is scientific, but it is a miracle. It is procreation. It is that you hold in your hand the future of your next generation, because you're going to make those generations. Are you going to give those generations, your children, your grandchildren, all this? Tell me honestly, how does it feel to get up and say to your future great-grandchild that I'm sorry, I have 350 billion kilograms of sugar cane, but 1 million tons of rice and wheat I don't have. I have, alcohol, but I don't have water. I have a tremendous product, but I don't have a private business that could use that product. I can only go through PSU. These are the issues that not only businesses, but more than businesses, politicians have to think. Not only national interest, but international interest. I shall stop there. I'm sorry I've really overshot my time, but I really thank you for your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. That was a very informative session. I'm sure we all have gained a new perspective today. So now the session is open for Q&A. I request the students to first introduce themselves and then proceed with your questions. Sir, I have a question for you.
Please, yeah.
So my question to you is, sir, how does having a empathetic mindset play a very important role in the business, in terms of business and politics? So how does it play an important role?
Right. So I think a clever businessman will automatically know that his workforce has to be happy. If the workforce is happy, the workforce would be productive. How do you make your workforce happy? You create a very wonderful congenial environment that people love to come. I gave the example of a creche that would help women, mothers. But more than that, you have events, you build team spirit, you encourage your workforce to buy stocks of your own company so that they have a stake in making their own company successful. These are 5 or 6 things that are ethical and moral capitalism that will prop up your company. But above all that, you have to have a tremendous product. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
So my questions to you is, how can implementing scientific management make employees happier in the organization?
Right. So, as I said, scientific management would involve 5 or 6 things. Empathy is one. So I already gave the examples of how management if the management is empathetic. Unlike what the 60s and 70s Hindi films would tell you the management, and you've all seen those Diwar and those scenes where you had this evil capitalist who is going completely disregarding the workforce, and the labor force goes on strike and all those things. But more than that, I think one thing I did not touch upon, unfortunately, because of paucity of time, are the labor reforms. Now, I don't know why, and I've gone through that, and a friend of mine, Gautam Chikarmane, has written a lot on the reforms that need to happen, that are happening in this country, but not at the pace we would like. And I don't know, unless we are able to change that, and a lot of reforms have been brought in, but unfortunately, like the CAA, this government has not yet notified it. I don't know why it is scared to take these steps. Maybe once it becomes a majority government, right now it's a minority coalition government, no? Once it gets 300 odd seats, sorry, that was a joke, then maybe it would, be strong and take steps that are needed in national and international interests.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, somebody.
Good morning, sir. My name is Nikhil. So my question to you is, sir, why don't people like you get into politics? Like when I see, most of the politicians are not that highly educated, right? So I don't think, their perspective of thinking might be a bit different. And one more thing, why these public sector companies? If you see this HAL or any other public sector companies, I don't think they are making much profits, as you mentioned before. So why don't the government make them privatized or collab with other privatized companies and make better profits?
Yeah, thanks very much. You are my friend or my enemy?
No, sir, just a general thought of.
Just joking, no. But the day I join politics, I'll either be fired within a day or at most a week. As they say, a week is a long time in politics. For me, that long time doesn't exist, because if you were to take the field you go into very seriously, and I said this as an opening remark, if you have to become a good politician, then by definition, you have to be immoral, unethical, you have to be hypocritical, you have to have all the bad qualities that generally all of us don't have. That is unfortunately the situation of politics right now. But the other question that you asked immediately after that, I wanted to remark on that, but I've forgotten. What was it? Sorry.
The public sector companies.
Even before that, you said something.
Why don't people very well educated get into politics?
Yes, I want to, because that is one fallacy that I really immediately want to correct. Some of the most corrupt politicians are the most highly educated ones. Okay. Education has got nothing to do with serving your country. In fact, it is sometimes to the detriment. Because if you believe that you are highly educated, you refuse to listen to the other person. Your ego kind of bloats. And as I said, some of the most corrupt politicians have been the most educated ones. And some of the greatest politicians who have done most for India and the world did not even go to school. I'll give you one example. The greatest, most beneficial scheme devised by any politician, living or dead, in this country, according to me, is the midday meal scheme. In every day, 120 million school children are given a good meal. Their parents send them to school because of that. Not only are they being educated because of that, they are gaining more nutrition because of that. They are surviving. They are combating diseases because of this scheme. And you know who developed it? Kamraj. He didn't even go to school. So please get this out of your head, that you need to be educated to serve this country. In fact, it should be, I'm not saying it should be the other way around, but this, absolutely there is no correlation with that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, I humbly welcome Chancellor Sir on stage and address the gathering.
Should I take the seats?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I have to appreciate the people or group decided to give the excellent topic to the perfect scientist for this, particularly at this scenario. That is scientific approach, doing business and politics, national interest. I will add one more word in this. Scientifically, politically, practically also important. Because why I am taking this word? Dr. Anand Ranganathan always speaks up not only these four topics, even practically he speaks. I don't know how many of you following him in debates. I continuously follow his debates where the debates are happening. I am learning a lot. I don't want to take more time here, but he spoke about Latur water shortage and how the politicians cut the ribbon to transport the water. They should be ashamed of that, but still they will do that. I know politicians I am dealing with politicians from last 50 years, at least 49 years. I have seen all politicians. The quality of politician day by day, I felt that will improve. No. It is going down like anything. It has touched almost bottom. Why I am telling this? You might have heard whether the students who are taken admission in MBA from BBA. I spoke about a STAR program, particularly youngsters should come for politics because they are the people who are ruling us. People who will take the voluntary retirement, people who will not perform well in education and discontinued people, and afterwards they might have done some unwanted things and earned a lot of money, looted money. They will join politics. By that time they would have lost all energy, everything, only to safeguard their what are all they have earned, looted. They will start party, they will be in the politics in their self-interest. But I think I am irrespective of politics, parties. Youngsters are doing at least thinking something. Who joined politics, young MPs, young MLAs, they are trying, but the number is very, very not even 1%. That's why they could not able to do. So what is the question? That's why I am always telling who wants to become politicians. I already told, think from now. We will try to guide you people what is happening and how what are all the benefits if you join politics, and if really think about the future of the country, nation. It is required because we cannot change the rules, that in the democracy politicians will rule. But when they framed these rules, those days politicians were really service oriented, seva. But here, this is only self, not seva here. Anyway, let us all think practically. I have to congratulate the team who selected this topic and particularly given to Dr. Anand Ranganathan. I am really very happy to hear his speech here. And he is the one who can speak fearlessly or He is also, ruthless. He will speak the truth. That is important. particularly for the management students. Tomorrow he will become managers, administrators, and you should be a real administrator, real manager. Not there also. Don't lose. Do your diplomacy, or don't be like a politicians because they have they are doing business now, not service. Let us forget all those things. But we have to live with them, and they will be ruling. And I want at least 4 or 5 MBA students become real politicians, not the present politician I am talking about. In every forum I am talking like this. Now I am sometimes I will speak. Even I will get calls from the chancellors, other chancellors, my counterparts. You are educating the public. You will tell we are, that is, educational institutions are responsible for everything what is happening in the society. I am openly telling, in whether it is electronic media or print media, I am openly speaking. It is a fact. I am also from business background. I have seen all politicians, this thing. That's why from last 10, 15 years, I am not, even though we are into business, I am away from all those things. But we have to, in the system, we have to live, we have to continue like this. But I want my children who are pursuing studies here should be a real citizens who should have the concern on the society, and you should become the pure, genuine politicians over a period of time. Definitely that will happen. Already I think you might have heard from your seniors. I told once we reach 1 lakh alumni from REVA, definitely if health permits, time permits, I will bring the revolution, because in such a way, if they during the election time, they will give a lot of lectures. If you elect us, we will make all Bangalore roads into golden roads, not concrete roads. Forget about that. You should definitely question there, from where you are going to bring this money. This is only 2 lakh crores we have as a budget. For that, it is not 2 lakh crores. That requires a whole, India's money to only to do that road in Bangalore, Gold Road. That is why, that is our money. We should question them. That is possible only with youngsters. So I am dreaming that at least that will happen in 4 or 5 years. Once I reach, again I am telling, once we reach our alumni strength to 1 lakh, definitely I will start that revolution from Bangalore. We will party for that. And let us start. I told, even my 75th birthday, the Founders' Day, REVA should be the torchbearers for everything. REVA should be different. We should be role models. And after hearing Dr. Anand's lecture, definitely, I think many of you might have changed your mind. And with this enlightenment, I want to hear the feedback, or send feedbacks. What is that you understood, or whether how many of you changed your mind? Yes, I will try to become a politician, like that. I have to thank you. I have to give a lot of, heads off to Dr. Anand Ranganathan. Thank you very much, and accepting and coming here. And my children definitely might have learned a lot of these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chancellor, sir, and especially for you saying that I am fearless and ruthless. And because of that, I just hope I am called again to this wonderful university, because my problem is they never call me the second time. Because I'll give you 2 examples. One, in Karnataka itself, I think last year, just after the COVID thing ebbed, they called me for a conference, and BJP had organized it. And it was called Integrity in Politics. And, so a lot of speakers, So there is still BJP government in Karnataka, but I'm quite safe in that sense. So they were waxing eloquent about, how they are moral and ethical and how the other opposition parties are corrupt. And I said, look, when you were in opposition, I said this. I've never been called again by them. I said, you demanded the arrest of a Congress MLA. Unfortunately, my namesake, Anand is his name, on 15 forest crime charges. And each forest crime charges carries a sentence, mandatory sentence of 4 years. So consequent sentences running would be almost 50, 60 years. BJP demanded in Vidhan Sauda. And then what happened? 10 Congress MLAs shifted to BJP. And now that man is the forest minister. After that, I was never called again. And very recently, BJP, I don't know why they call me for these things, knowing me, but it's very good of them, very gracious of them. I know they won't call me again because the conference was on dynasty, the real scourge of politics. And it was inaugurated by Mr. Fadnavis. And they went on and on about how Congress and Samajwadi Party are dynasty. And then my turn came and I said, not only is Mr. Fadnavis a dynast because his father was in the BJP, I took the name of 94 BJP MLAs and MPs who are dynasts. After that, I have not been called, but I hope, sir, that I would love to come here again and interact with this wonderful audience. Thank you so much again. Thank you.
You can take this. Thank you, sir. Firstly, I would like to thank our Chancellor, sir, Dr. P. Shamaraju, for creating such a platform, for such an informative platform and enriching events. Thank you so much, sir. I would also like to thank our today's chief guest, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, for gracing us with his presence today, for sharing many valuable insights. Thank you so much, sir. Last but not least, I would like to thank all the faculty members and students for their cooperation and active participation throughout the event. Thank you all.